Hi, I'm Samantha Brentmore.
And I'm Rose Dioro. Welcome to the Rosemore Roundtable, a limited discussion series covering a range of topics specific to the romance audiobook industry.
Today's episode kicks off something a little different, as Rose and I have been wanting to dig in deeper on some trickier topics, bringing some of the in-depth conversations we've been having privately to the roundtable in an effort to hopefully stimulate your own conversations with your networks and communities.
Our approach to these special deep dives is driven by curiosity and, as much as possible, a kind of journalistic neutral stance.
We don't claim to have answers or be a representative of every community within the romance audiobook sphere. We may get things wrong because of our own perspectives and experiences.
And if there is some factual error, we want to appropriately correct that. So please do email us at rosemoreroundtable@gmail.com.
Otherwise, we hope that what we will unpack over the next few episodes will spur some reflection both for yourself and your communities, and that you have these conversations yourselves, building on some of the thoughts that have been digging at us.
Okay, I think that's enough table setting. Well, let's get into it.
All right. So what even is this? What are we talking about? Where did this come from? Rose and I have had this discussion in some form or another for years based on our observations about the community and how we engage online and in person as a narrator in the space. And in this space, we mean romance audiobooks. And it's a lot of where this roundtable even came from, as an idea between the two of us. We could never think of the right panel for this particular discussion, so we landed on this format.
And so what are we going to get into exactly? Well, we are specifically going to discuss the community of romance audiobook industry professionals and listeners, and how and where they currently connect, and where they find and cultivate community.
What areas are we going to cover? Well, we're going to dig deep into the following areas of conversation over the course of 4 different episodes. Managing your career. What does being online as an actor look like today? And how does being online impact career opportunities? Finding your community. What are you seeking and how do you find it? The rules of engagement. How do we interact online and in person as this community? And who or what informs that? And then where are we now and what's next?
Why do we want to have this discussion? Okay, so we noticed the rapid shift in recent years, and we're both reflecting on the impact of that on us and on our industry. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that now, what that looks like, how it's shifted. So what are some of these changes that we've seen? Well, I'll say that, I think this started as, when I entered the romance space, I immediately noticed such a strong sense of community. People were really digging into a passion, something they had a passion for, a hobby, content that they really, really loved, and were finding other people who had that same or found that same joy from consuming this content, these romance books. And I think for a lot of people that I've spoken to, it was, they weren't finding necessarily those people in their immediate lives. And so they turned to an online sphere to find like-minded people, to kind of get excited about the same books that they were reading and the narrators they were listening to. And that started to branch out into conventions as well, especially on the other side of the quarantine of people, they built these strong connections through in these online spaces, and then we're really craving that in-person connection. So we're then navigating their way to in-person events.
Yeah, I feel like the romance audiobooks and just romance books in general cultivate a sense of community more than so many other genres of books that I see. And I think some of it is, again, when I started, and it's a little bit different now, you kind of started with like, oh, well, if you know, you know. And like, I don't have anybody with me that's reading this and that gets me, right? Like, I think with a lot of like genre fiction, there's a lot of like poo-pooing it if you don't read it or you're not into it. Whether or not that's romance or sci-fi or fantasy or, whatever. And so I think that there was a real drive to find your tribe, your people online. What was interesting, I think the shift for me was that and this is, I think, indicative of just a shift in online culture, which was that as an actor, not just in VO, but in all spheres, there started to become this pressure to establish a brand and show up online. So whether or not you were a stage actor or a voiceover actor or film and television, there was this drive to like, well, you kind of have to have something on there and engage with people, whether or not you're being, quippy on Twitter, or you seem to be living this great behind the scenes on set life on Instagram. And I think those two things kind of grew, this growing of community, seeking out of community in this romance community, this book community, at the same time that professional actors were being pushed to show up and engage, as a brand of themselves online. And I think, at least for myself, I don't know if you felt this way, that I started noticing people really feeling pressured to, well, I think that's going to make the difference in me getting a job or booking work. And I'm talking like pre-2020, because like that, I think,
absolutely.
There was definitely a tip shift. But yeah, I think that those are the two big, the like behemoths that were starting to like come, and then met ahead, I think, in 2020 as romance books and that community and content creator culture, and being a brand as an actor in a real tangible way came to a head around 2020.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I would say for sure, as like in the rise of the internet, which was far earlier than 2020, actors in any medium started to understand that they could have a little more agency in how they're seen. Prior to that, it was you needed a manager. They were going to kind of create this persona, for you and put it out into the world to help you book work. And what the internet did, especially social media did, but even prior to that, I think just being able to have your own website or your own blog, any way to kind of say to your industry, this is who I am. I want you to know about me. I want you to know these things about me so that you can consider me for potential work, and you can consider hiring me. There was a lot of power in that, right? Like to not have to rely on a third party to get people to know about you, to get in front of people. There's real power in that. And then, like you said, with these sort of genre-focused communities for actors that were entering those spaces from the creative side of things, I think there was a shift in, okay, I needed an online presence so potential clients could hire me, to I need an online presence so that fans now know who I am, because there's like, or that people that are consuming the work that I do, not the hiring entity, can know about me. And get to know what I'm about, because they also hold some power in me being hired, right? I think that was a big shift in sort of the land of the internet. It gave everybody a little more power to kind of speak up and say, I like this. I want to see more of this. I think the world of like the marketing world used to be so heavily focused on market research, right? They would make a commercial, they'd bring in a group of people to watch the commercial, they'd ask them what they thought about that. And I don't work in marketing, so I don't know if that's still happening or not, but I do know that more and more frequently, those, marketing folks are looking to social media to see what people are talking about and what they're responding to. And so,
right? We're looking at trends. We're looking
Exactly.
at what's trending or the conversations that we're having. And I think that that's an important kind of like mile marker, I can't think of the right word, but like inflection point to pull out here, which is that the power, consumers got a lot more power.
Exactly.
And so we started marketing ourselves. We started marketing ourselves thinking, oh, exactly to your point, I can't get in front of these casting agents, or I can't get in this room. So I'm going to be like, I'm thinking kind of 2080, 2010-y, like, well, I could like put some content on YouTube. Like I remember like a lot of stage actors were doing like bits and things, and like their songs were going up. Oh, like going to so many cabaret performances in New York, people would record them and put them online so that they had like this accessibility. They'd post them on whatever social media sites they were on at the time, with the idea that I was speaking to people who are going to give me jobs and opportunities. And then what started to happen was the people who were giving jobs and opportunities were listening to consumers more. And so then we realized, oh, so part of this is also, I need to be talking to consumers and listening to like what they want. And that's a lot of power.
Absolutely.
And in any of those things, we sort of entered into this saying, oh, well, I'm going to go online because I want a little bit more power over like my career and opportunities, which a quick pros and cons of that, I want to say, like, I think it diversifies. Like if you're a casting director, now I've got access to somebody who's not just based, in either of the coasts. It's going to help. I think, that helped drive a lot of the change in the market that we needed desperately about like authentic, diverse casting, because your pool just got bigger and it was easier for me to see you because I could post something and say, we're doing a Pepsi commercial and we need people that are Persian girls from Kansas. And I could be like, yes, that's me.
It's so specific and it's exactly who I am.
So specific, it is exactly me. So like that's a real pro of this. But then I think one of the cons then starts to be then a lot of the focus of your work. I think that power shift has some cons and has some pros, but it also starts to impact the way that you think of yourself and your work because a lot more power. For me, I think started to come off of like the work itself, and you could be. For a time there was a feeling of, I can be as amazing as I want to be. I'd watch some of my actor friends be like, oh, I'm going on audition after audition after audition. And I know technically I'm better, but then it's boiling down to, well, where can I find you online? And have you been making YouTube content?
Do you have that conversation's you come with followers.
Exactly. And that conversation's been happening with actors across the board, for well over a decade.
Yeah,
one of my very dear friends is on a network television show, and she had like very little online presence, hates it. And once she gets on a CBS show, they're like, sorry, sweetheart, like you're posting.
Right.
You're posting a lot. You have to figure out what that content is. And it was a really hard, so only to say that pressure is real and tangible, I think.
Side note question, does she get paid? Like when being asked to do that, is that part of her contract? Do you know? I mean, maybe you don't know the answer to that.
I don't know the answer to that, but I do know that the Actors Union, SAG-AFTRA, does have like fees and rules around if you're going to ask an actor to do promotional work, that they have rates set for some of that.
Absolutely. But I think it sounds like what they were asking is her just to have a presence. And so I think there's something really interesting there that we can maybe explore in a future part of this series. Because I think that's really at the crux of it, right? Like she's now being tasked with being a persona that separate from the work that she's being paid to do, to be a persona in internet land, which benefits the show, which therefore makes the show more money, but perhaps she's not making more money directly from that. And so lines get really blurry about what your job is, why you're here. And you're being asked, if your show, the way the internet works right now, the way social media works, you're showing up as you, right? Like you're bringing you as a human to this rather than the character you're playing or whatever it is. And that's an interesting ask of someone, right? Like
it's a big ask. And it's you don't have, I think the other important thing to point out here is that particularly in the audiobook world, like she probably has resources on a network television show that we obviously don't have in this world, but there's no media training. There's nobody giving you any kind of guidance to say, hey, I get that your brand is like, I'll go with me. This is the way out there. You're just a chuckle clown out there, chuckle clown. And nobody is sitting on the sidelines going, just so you know, if you put out a lot of that content and people are engaging with it, it's going to maybe affect the type of roles that people are going to hire you for or the ways that people will hear you. Like there is a way that you thoughtfully control that image and put it out there that is its whole own job that nobody's getting any guidance in this world. And I don't think anybody's really thoughtfully thinking about it because we are also, it's bumping up against, and there's a lot of people coming out of, oh, well, I was a content creator or an influencer first. And so those were where my opportunities were coming from. And so there's this persona that is actually more powerful than, just being an actor who's just like going to the acting mines every day.
Right.
Like,
no, exactly.
Like, this is my character. I'm, and I think, we've said before, and I've observed this as well, that I did a promo once that, for an author, and there was somebody that was following the author because they liked the author's writing, and the author had created content with me and other voice actors in one of these like narrator reveal videos.
Mm-hmm.
And the comment was, no, you showed me their faces. I love your books, but I didn't want to engage with the narrators that way. That's why I don't follow narrators online. And I think we think everybody wants this content. We got
Right.
to. But there are certain people that say, I don't want that access because it does influence how I think of them and their performances and what they can do. And so I think I just think it's important for us to remember that as actors who are pressured to put these brands online and don't have the resources to thoughtfully think about it, and also are doing like 10 jobs at once.
Yes.
So like, okay, on top of chasing all my responsibilities, I now also have to have like a content strategy and a brand strategy. No, sorry. Like, I released a book. Bye.
Yeah. And I think, another sort of, I don't know if this is a pro or con. It's just a neutral statement at the moment, just an observation, I suppose. But I think it's also confusing, or perhaps it's confusing sort of, how do I put this? I mean, I guess it's like lines get a little bit blurred for actors in this space when you are tasked with that. I'm showing up as me, but also I have content that I'm pushing because I know I'm here because hopefully you're interested in the art that I'm making. And so I want to make sure you know about that. And also just, hi, it's important that, we live in this world where there's such easy access to the people that are making the thing that you consume, that you have this ability to have sort of a personal relationship. But is that why we're there? Or is that, like it's those lines are
and
a
what
little
entitles
bit
anybody to that? Like, when
Right.
did we cross a threshold? Like, talking about what are some of the changes we've observed? Like, and this has happened in every sphere. Like, let's talk about like on the high scale of celebrity. We have, as like a culture, become very entitled to people's private lives and the artists that are making work that we feel very connected to. And I think that there's very good reasons for that, because there's a lot of stuff that has come out over the years of like, I love this book. And it's like, oh, well, the person who made it and is making money off of this is like a total maniac. So I don't want to support that. Who else can I support instead? I think people are entitled to make those type of decisions if they want to. But also there's a whole separate other conversation about separating the art from the artist.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Which
but I think
really
it's like, it's really hard to do now, especially if there's this pressure of saying, I should get to know everything about you and like all these things, because that's going to inform my enjoyment of the work that you do, which is like, it gets really tricky, because where do you draw that line? And there's also, this starts to bleed into something that again is a separate topic too, around the job of an actor and this really blurry line around authenticity and our ability to bring characters to life. And I think that there's we'll maybe do another 4-part conversation
about
about
series unto itself.
I mean, because it is, but it does start to bump up against this a little bit, to your point of like, just be, charming you, brand you, that's going to show up on the Drew Barrymore show and be like, you just love me as a person, like, and I'm selling this part of me. And you have access to this part of me.
Yeah, in order to, that's the thing with, again, yes, separate series, but related to what we're talking about, because of this mostly very positive shift to trying to really critically think about who we're casting in what situation, it requires that somebody knows those parts of your identity. And is it enough that the producer knows that about you so they can cast authentically? Or does it not mean anything if the community that's then consuming that content doesn't know that about you? And so then is there a pressure there to stand up and wave and say, hey, yeah, this is me. Here's all my criteria so that I was cast correctly. It gets really complicated. And I think one shift in society as a whole is this: we are truly losing our ability to approach topics with nuance. And so in that case, as people are trying to do good in the world, coming from a really good place, there's also this potential to call into question or force someone to say something or identify, like talk about themselves, show up personally in a particular way that just wasn't exactly there before. So that's a big shift that I've noticed. But I did want to name that this, like wanting to sort of know about people's private lives is not new, certainly. Like if you think about like the golden age of Hollywood and like the rise of sort of gossip columns and things like that. Like that's always been not always, but for a very long time has been an interest that people have. I just think the difference now is that it's self-perpetuated, like, and people can reach you individually and ask you those questions. And and ask you to show up in certain ways. And then as an actor or as the whatever creative person you are, you're put in a position of having to make a choice. Am I going to get on the bandwagon or am I not? Or what do I want? How do I want that to, where do I want that to live in me? Like, how do I want to show up in this space? So I think we are now, as creative people, as artistic people, we're now tasked with having to make a choice about that. Whereas in generations past, I think it wasn't always in the artist's hands, right? Like maybe someone,
most definitely not. And it also wasn't as much a requirement. Most certainly not on the voice actor audiobook level.
Absolutely.
Right. So this is another thing. Like there's
any voice actor for that matter.
No,
nobody cared.
You didn't know.
Right.
And a lot of the reason why a lot of people, like actors, were drawn to, look, I'll tell you, I was drawn to voiceover work because like a big part of that was that I didn't want to be, I'm very uncomfortable, like with, you and I know we can't take a good photo to save our lives. There's just like, that was,
together anyway, it does not work.
Yes. And having a camera around fundamentally changes my connection to work and performance. Being conscious of being observed, that's a me problem. That's a me. Like some actors are incredible at it and have a wonderful relationship to a camera. I didn't. That's why I wanted to move into this kind of work. And it really changed that. That's like, well, now no matter what aspect of VO you're in, there is a pressure to show up in a certain way. And that you also, as you consider the impact of it on your job and your job opportunities, you feel like, somebody had said casually, what I like about being able to show up on social media is that instead of sending out into the void, hey, just so you know, I've got some availability in the fall, really looking to do these types of characters in the future, like think of me, and you like hope somebody responds. Cultivating content and community online felt like a really tangible way to hold and create opportunity for yourself, particularly in romance, particularly where there's independently produced work opportunities. You can make a connection directly with an author who could directly hire you. And that feels very empowering. But it also, I think to your point of how it's changed, you can start then at that level and start by building those connections with community and showing up as yourself. And that's like where you bubble up out of. And then you've established this expectation that, well, when I was just talking to 15 people, it was a lot easier to give a lot of pieces of myself because I knew all 15 people. Oh, now all of a sudden I'm at scale. It becomes trickier to navigate and figure out how much of myself I can give and still do all my other jobs, and that I'm willing to give and still be authentic because that's how I started here. Like it starts to steamroll into something else entirely. And on the other side, if I'm somebody who has felt like I've made a real connection with you as a listener and as a fellow fan of romance, and I feel like, well, you just disappeared, I understand how that like can hurt and like mess with you.
Yeah.
And I think there's something in that dynamic that we're definitely going to dig into a little bit later because it makes sense, right? That it develops that way and that both sides of that, I think, feel very valid. And it is like, it's a weird thing that we haven't had to navigate and also is very specific to, I think the type of connections that people make to those of us that do this work in romance is also very intimate and unique. You're being welcoming me into your ears to tell a story about vulnerability and connection and like explicit content. Like this is a very intimate connection and vulnerable trust moment that we're having, that I'm also not actively there with you while it's happening, right? I did it in my box by myself. And now you've had this experience. And I think that starts to create something that is also very unique to this community in terms of.
Absolutely. That's such a good point. That we as the actor are sharing a lot of vulnerability with folks that, like you said, we're not there when they're consuming it, and then we're interacting at other moments when we're not in that vulnerable space anymore, but perhaps they just stopped listening to it. And there is something unique for sure about that exchange. And I think it's in part what created such a strong sense of community amongst folks who are listening, and also eyeball rating. But I think the audiobook listener romance community is specific itself, because that is such an intimate experience. And because like your buddy maybe has listened to the same book. And so you two together had this, intimate experience with this narrator or these narrators in your ears. And now you can kind of talk about that. And maybe you get to meet them at, and have like a deep conversation with them at an in-person event, or you're having an exchange online. And that, I think it can be wonderful and also confusing. And again, those lines can get blurred very easily because you are all sharing these intimate experiences together, but from completely different sides of the coin, and not in real time. And so that's tricky.
It is tricky, and it's something that's changed, right? Because we used to do this work and say, well, I don't know who's going to listen to this. I remember when I started, this is definitely not true now, but I remember when I started the whole like, well, do you know the number one consumer of romance audiobooks? And I'd be like, who's the number one consumer? And they'd be like, oh, well, long-term, long-form truck drivers. They were the ones. Like this was like the myth that like was going around when I was starting, was like, well, that's who's really listening to this. And I was like, oh, that's kind of fun. It's great. I'm keeping somebody company on like a long ride.
Yeah.
Certainly not the case now. And you are much more aware of who is actually consuming this content. And to your point, I had this emotional, vulnerable experience in the booth months ago, weeks ago. Now all these people are reading it. Now they can reflect that back to me. I'm being brought back to that place. It's a very different feedback loop than we had before. And I think that is another thing that has changed and has pros and cons. And is another reason, like just another example of like why we think at this moment, it's good for us to kind of pause. Because I think for both of us, we feel like there's kind of like a snowball momentum that's happening. And there have been enough things that feel like, whoa, 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 whoa. I'll just speak for myself. I'm not consciously and like actively in control of the way that I'm now engaging in this work, or it's taking up so much of my brain space and I'm overthinking it. And I'm not focusing on these other things that I think for us, we wanted to pause and say, a lot has changed. And how has it changed us? And how has it changed the industry? And how has it changed the community? And do we want to or need to, proactively start helping shape it in another direction instead of letting it continue on its own force?
Yeah. Yes to all of that. Before we move on, I want to just circle back to when we were talking about marketing, because I think there is something, again, that's unique about romance books and the marketing power of social media, because so much of this content is in the indie space. And so a lot seems to come down to how are people talking about the books? Who are they talking about in the online spaces? And I think authors sometimes are really looking, because it's the authors who get to make those choices as opposed to traditional publishing, where it's somebody else, right? It's not the person who's actually making the thing. And so that's a big shift too, the rise of indie publishing, specifically in romance. and just the boom of that simultaneously with the rise in social media and the rise in this, it's not just in romance, obviously, like this culture of reviews. Like you think about how like Amazon reviews, I think Yelp really was what got it going. You know, this idea that the consumer gets to say, you know, we're not looking to food journalists as much anymore, or excuse me, like restaurant reviewers and people like that anymore. We're looking to our neighbor to tell us if they liked something or not. And I think we're seeing that in books too, and specifically in romance books and in indie books. And so much, it's sort of this. Whoa, this is a podcast.
Like an Ouroboros, like it's sort of
thank you.
feeding and eating itself.
Yes,
Okay. But he was doing a great little spinny hand movement that you couldn't see.
I don't know.
I know. It's fine. We got there. We got that
out by now. But yeah, that's exactly right. It's sort of an endless cycle of, and where does it begin and where does it end? Like, I don't know where the start is, right, anymore.
Right.
Like,
and not to say that empowerment of the consumer is bad, right?
No.
I don't think, because I think that like there is something to be said for, well, these reviews are for other people like me. And this review by this, you know, industry expert is from perhaps a different audience, right? Like there are different conversations had about the work, and one is not better than the other, and one is they're just meant for different people and different conversations. But what has happened is there's almost been an overcorrection, right? Where there was too much power in Siskel and Ebert.
Exactly.
Now there's like, well, too much power in John Doe, Amazon user 456.
Right.
And now, so like, how do we balance that out, or still find places for both of them to exist, to speak to the people that they need to speak to?
Yes. And actually, you just made me think too, a big change that has happened is the lack of accountability. Right? What you just said about like this anonymous name. Obviously, that's not always the case. Like, I know plenty of folks that are reviewing books that are very clear about who they are, and that's it's a whole other thing. But there's also this thing of you can have a lot of anonymity and share whatever thoughts you have and have a big impact, but no one can reach you, and you can't be held accountable for the thing that you said and the impact that it had. And I think that shows up in a lot of different ways, not just in reviews, certainly with narrators and personas and all of this. Like there's, because everything is on the internet, and it is hard to know what's real, what's not, and what someone is bringing to the table that you don't know about when they share information with you or when they share an opinion with you. Like there's a lot of unknown versus the world where of Siskel and Ebert, who easy to track down.
Right.
So that's a big, again, and I totally agree. Like there's not a value statement here. It is just a fact, right? Like it is a fact that there is a much stronger ability to have anonymity in the things that you say and do in the world that we live in now. And it is clear that has an impact, right? And makes things look different than they did before.
100%. There's so much that obviously this comes from, and this is just a taste of like the type of conversations we're going to have and where we want to go. And I'm just really glad and appreciative of you, friend, for making the time to like really reflect on this stuff in a meaningful way. And we hope that, for anybody who listens in, that it causes the same kind of pause for consideration and question. Before we break, so what we're going to do, we're launching this episode. We're going to get into a couple definitions of some vocabulary that we're going to use throughout the episode that I think is important to ground us in. And then we're going to take a couple weeks. We're going to go to Book Bonanza, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. And then we'll release these episodes near the end of June and in July, just so that folks listening know when they can expect more of this amazing back and forth about this very, complicated and nuanced topic. So I think it would be helpful for us to name some of these things that we're going to get into, and
Right.
folks and communities that we're talking about, whether or not that's narrators or content creators, and what we mean by community and where people are gathering. So Rose, can you talk to us like what we mean necessarily by like an audiobook narrator in the romance world?
Sure. So a narrator can be full-time or aspiring, everything in between. Someone who claims online to be a narrator and as such is selling their skills. And I think it's worth noting that narrators come from all sorts of different creative backgrounds or not creative backgrounds. Some people arrive as actors, some people arrive as stage actors or film actors or something else. Others are in the VO world, the voiceover world in other ways. Some people, sold real estate, or it could be any number of ways that people arrive here. And in these discussions, we are considering all of those folks who name themselves as actors and show up as having a skill or learning a skill in order to because of an aspiration to use that skill to read audiobooks and perform audiobooks. We are calling those people narrators in these conversations.
Very well said. And I think the same is true to a degree of authors, right?
Yes. Yeah, same. So full-time authors, part-time authors, aspiring authors, everything in between. Someone who's positioning themselves as an author of books that could be turned into audio by a producer or self-produced at any point.
Yeah, because I think it's important because this is, again, as we said earlier, that like indie publishing and the power of the author and where there are work opportunities is a really important piece of this discussion. And I think people who position themselves either as narrators or authors for either of those opportunities, it's important to name them as such. So then the third group here that we're going to talk about is producers. So a producer is somebody who can then bring that book into audio. And that could be anybody from somebody, small, like my studio at Brookshop Audio, that is working directly with clients to bring them to be distributed on platforms like ACX. Or that can be somebody that is a higher level, like the trad pubs that we talk about, like Penguin Random House, but anybody who's in a position to bring a book from the page to your headphones. The other group that has many definitions, I think, and like a lot of influence in here and has changed a lot over the years is this content creator / influencer community. And I think both of these titles, in my estimation, have kind of slightly different definitions, or maybe their definitions have changed over time. I don't know if you felt this way, as you've watched people kind of pick up different terms or label themselves as different ways over time. But I would say a content creator is, in my mind, somebody who's like genuinely built either a living because they've built a business around it, but is very intentionally creating a specific kind of content for a social media channel of some nature. And that could be like, I'm baking cakes about romance books I like, and here's my like YouTube video of how I made that cake. That could be somebody doing like a meme account, but somebody who's consistently putting out content related to the genre and the books that are being released there. Could also include reviews to a certain extent, more and more. That's a big part of it. There are people who have made entire careers out of getting paid to do promotional work for book releases and tied to their reviews, getting early copies of books. Influencer is a term that I think is kind of outdated, but maybe still some people use it. If you feel passionately about this, let us know. But I feel like influencer really came out of like a sort of early internet kind of Kim Kardashian, Gwyneth Paltrow sensibility of like, if they use it, I'm going to buy it. And that somebody's really intentionally using their platform to say, go buy or do this thing. And that can be hand in hand with somebody that's a content creator. But I think sometimes content creators aren't necessarily driving you for a call to action, if that makes sense. Sometimes content creators like, you don't have to buy my cake. I'm making cakes. Check it out. So I think that's a little bit of a distinction, but they definitely, they maintain a platform. They are, they're being like, I think very intentional and professional about this. They're looking at, algorithm changes. They're looking at trends. They're looking at all the ways to use these various platforms to increase their engagement or follower counts or whatever metric that they're using to drive that. Yeah, I think that's somebody. And that's a little bit different than the other group, which is just somebody who I think is a straight listener, reader, fan.
Which is exactly what I was going to say. I think that a lot of fans, listeners, readers become content creators or reviewers, but sometimes they just stay in the fan space, the listener, reader space. That could look a number of different ways. Someone with little to no online presence related to books, promos, ALCs, ARCs, all of that. They're not necessarily engaging in those things, but they are reading them. They're listening to them. These folks may attend conventions. They may be part of a book club or fan group, but again, that's really for them and not something that they're choosing to share publicly as like putting a strong effort behind creating graphics or writing a review for it. But I do think that's one of those spaces where there is a little bit of a blurred line, or can be, right? Where maybe I passively sometimes feel inspired to create, what is it called? Edits, people call it? Where they make these beautiful graphics. I don't know. I don't know how people are making that stuff. That's a conversation for another day. I think it's all really cool. So there's folks who do that kind of thing, but it's not necessarily like they're trying to build an account where people are coming to see it. It's just part of the way they engage with this thing that they love. So I would say that's where we sort of see a difference between the next step to I'm making this thing and I'm making it on some kind of regular basis and building my own base of followers. And I think that's where we kind of move into content creator land. And if you add to that, then I'm now sharing my thoughts about what I thought about this book. You're moving into reviewer land. But there is kind of a phase before that of I just make this when I feel like it and when I'm inspired by something, or I don't make anything at all and I just read my book and I go to my book club and I have a grand time.
There's so many people that we've met at the in-person conventions that I haven't had a single online interaction with before, that do not engage online and are happy to just go to the event because they go to this event once a year and they get to meet the people who they listen to, and it's great for them, and like that's the only interaction they have. And so I'd put like that type of person, definitely squarely in that category. There's also, like, to your point that, people come from that category and then go into content creation or create businesses out of this. There's a growing community of personal assistants, editors, cover designers, all sorts of folks related to the industry and getting your book made and out and sold in the world, that have often come from any of these groups that we've talked about. And the lines do get a little blurry. We can all have many identities. I started as a narrator and became a fan of the genre myself. When my schedule was a lot more flexible, what I was choosing to read was, I'm really curious about what people are writing in romance. So I was doing a lot more romance reading in my spare time. So I came narrator to listener. And so I think we'll get into in this conversation, we want to recognize that we do know that there are a lot of other people that are working and have their own micro communities. I'm sure many editors are talking to each other in their own little communities. And we just want to recognize that we know that they exist and that they often kind of come out of this. So when we talk about job opportunities or how people engage and some of the blurry lines around professionalism and, how you work, how you engage with a colleague online will come up in these discussions.
For sure.
And so, and when we talk, so like when we say like community, right? Community is where like you're gathering. So yes, book clubs, yes, conventions, right? There's a lot of in-person opportunities, but there are a lot of online spaces where people are using the right hashtag and like, I just read my first romance book. Beep bop, romance books that I should be reading. Oh, now I've just stumbled into a whole universe. And so that's, either on platforms like Facebook, X, TikTok, Instagram, Reddit, Clubhouse, or like paid, or paid membership platforms like Discord or Patreon. There are a lot of places where people are finding their people and talking about this shared interest. So that's kind of the landscape that we're looking at as we dig into these topics.
Yes. And we also, we have a lot we want to cover, and we can only share from our own observations, our own personal knowledge, and we want to hear from you too, so that we can expand how these conversations take place. So before we dig in deep and release further episodes, we want a chance to hear from you. And the way that we are going to do that is a couple of different ways. We're both going to Book Bonanza next, I don't know when this is going to air, but next month.
In June.
In June. Thank you. And we are going to have like a little cocktail meet and greet, cocktail hour meet and greet thing. And we want to hear from you. We've got a couple of questions that we're going to make available for you to come and answer, possibly record you if you want. Yeah. And then for those that aren't going to Book Bonanza, we're going to make those questions available via a form, which you will find in this episode's description, so that you can send in your responses as well. And we hope to incorporate some of what we hear from you in the coming episodes in this series.
Yeah, we really want to hear as many perspectives as possible, because as we said at the beginning of the episode, we want to have as well-rounded a perspective and amount of feedback when we start to dig into some of these issues more specifically. So we hope that you come back here and join us at the end of June when we return to this discussion with the first part of our conversation, which is, what does being online as an actor look like today, and how does it impact your career opportunities?
So do be sure to I swear I talk for a living. Be sure to subscribe to our channel on YouTube or your podcast. I can't do it. It's all breaking down over here.
It's done. Toast.
I've given up.
Just blibe. Blibe online to your blurp podcasts.
Here are the places: YouTube or your podcast platform of choice. We want to make sure you're alerted when the next episode goes live. We don't want you to miss anything.
Amazing. Until then, please be well, and maybe think about how long you're scrolling those socials and engaging on things. I don't know, maybe I will obsess about it until we get to talk about it. See you then.
Okay. Bye-bye.